Eric, as the designated spokesman, gave the prepared cover story. We reached the limits of our current drilling technology. The geological strata proved too dense. We've shifted our focus to analyzing the atmospheric and electromagnetic data we've already collected. Jones listened without blinking. His gaze was unnerving, seeming to look right through the lie. He walked over to the table where the gear fragment, their most precious and secret artifact, was locked away in a secure case. He didn't ask what was in it, he just looked at it. Dr. Taylor, he said, turning his attention to Travis, your work in temporal physics is well regarded. Have you observed any discrepancies in local space-time? Any chronoton emissions? Travis felt a chill run down his spine. Chronoton emissions were a theoretical byproduct of temporal distortion, a concept that existed only in the most esoteric physics journals. It wasn't public knowledge. The fact that Jones used the term meant he wasn't guessing. He knew about the 2-second time delay in the east field. We've recorded some GPS anomalies. Travis answered carefully, but nothing that would suggest a stable temporal distortion. Jones gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Keep up the good work, doctors, he said. He turned and walked out, got back in his sedan, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and a profound sense of dread in his wake. He knew, or at least his organization did. The partners were real. The black helicopters and the hacking attempts weren't just idle curiosity. They were part of a focused surveillance operation by a group that possessed a scientific understanding far beyond the public domain. The custodians were no longer alone in their vigil. They were in a silent, undeclared Cold War with a shadow agency for the greatest secret on Earth. Chapter 20, the second verse. The visit from Mr. Jones was a catalyst. It shattered their academic isolation and forced them to confront the reality of their new role. They were not just translators, they were protectors. The pressure seemed to resonate with the Mesa itself. A month after Jones's visit, as the team was debating how to increase their own security without drawing more attention, the 1.2 gigahertz signal returned. It was not the gentle, inquisitive pulse of the golden ratio. This new signal was a torrent. It was dense, complex, and layered with information. It was no longer a greeting, it was a data dump. A desperate, focused transmission. Eric and Travis worked for 2 days straight, filtering the signal and trying to find a pattern. They used the question symbol as their new decryption key, applying it to the flood of data. What emerged was not a language of words, but a language of pure information. The signal contained 3 distinct elements. The first was a detailed schematic. It was a 3D rotating model of a complex biological molecule, but one with an impossible quasi-crystalline structure. It was beautiful and terrifying, a vision of life based on principles that defied terrestrial biology. The second element was a star map, but this was no static chart. It was a dynamic moving model of a stellar nursery, showing the birth of stars and the coalescence of planets over millions of years. It was a memory, a recording of a creation event. The third element was the most chilling. It was a sound. A low, resonant, mournful tone that rose and fell in a slow, heartbreaking cadence. It was a sound of immense loss, a funeral dirge for a dead star. It's not just talking to us, Lena said, her face pale as she stared at the data. It's showing us who it is. That molecule, that's its biology. That star map, that's its home. And that sound, that's its history. The entity was a survivor, an exile, the last remnant of a world that had died. The archive wasn't a library, it was a memorial. And the Sentinel was not a warship, it was a tomb guardian protecting the last memory of a lost civilization. The weight of their secret suddenly became 1,000 times heavier. They were not just guarding an alien artifact, they were guarding a soul. Chapter 21, The Schism. The second signal fractured the fragile unity of the custodians. The new information was too profound, too personal. It changed the stakes completely. Travis Ever the Explorer was energized. This changes everything. It's not just an intelligence, it's a being. It's sharing its memories with us. The warning was about getting too close, too fast. But this is an invitation. We need to respond. We need to find a way to reopen the borehole and establish a new dialogue. Lena was horrified. An invitation, Travis, it showed us its own extinction, and right after we get a visit from a spook who knows about time travel. You don't see the connection. Jones's people are the reason it's talking. It's scared. It's reaching out because it feels a new threat. If we go back down there, we will be leading them right to its heart. The team was split down the middle. Travis and Chris, the archaeologist, argued for engagement. They believed the entity was a benign intelligence and that humanity's future depended on learning from it. Lena and Eric argued for absolute protection. They saw the entity as a refugee and Mr. Jones as the vanguard of the same predatory instinct that had driven its creators to extinction. The arguments grew heated. The shared burden that had united them now threatened to tear them apart. Travis saw caution as cowardice. Lena saw his eagerness as recklessness. "You're a scientist, Lena," he exclaimed during one tense argument. "Since when do we run away from the data?" "I'm also a human being," she shot back, "and I have seen what we do to things we covet. This being survived the death of its own star. I am not going to let it be destroyed by a Pentagon budget meeting." The schism was deep-rooted in their most fundamental beliefs about humanity and their place in the universe. Their vow of silence held, but within the command center, a new bitter silence grew between them. The custodians were broken. Chapter 22, The Long Game. The impasse was broken by Eric. He had been quiet during the arguments, processing, analyzing. He called them together in the main briefing room, his face grim. "We are all right, and we are all wrong," he began, his calm voice cutting through the tension. "Travis is right that we cannot ignore this new signal. It's the most important data we have. But Lena is right that we are no longer operating in a vacuum. We have been compromised." He pulled up a satellite image of the ranch on the main screen. "We cannot reopen the borehole. It would be a beacon to Jones's people. But we also cannot simply do nothing. The entity is aware and it is communicating. Our silence could be misinterpreted as indifference or worse, hostility." He outlined a new strategy, a long game. "We must become two things at once," he explained. "To the outside world of Mr. Jones, we must become the most boring, unproductive, and slightly kooky research project in the country. We need to give them a show. A controlled, theatrical haunting." His plan was audacious. They would use their intimate knowledge of the bubble and the ranch's electromagnetic quirks to stage phenomena. They would launch weather balloons that would appear as UAPs on radar but be gone on visual inspection. They would use focused EM pulses to harmlessly disrupt the electronics of any surveillance drones. They would create a smokescreen of high strangeness, a litany of unverifiable, frustratingly weird events that would lead any intelligence analyst down a rabbit hole of cranks and conspiracy theories, burying the real signal under a mountain of noise. "We will not lie to our benefactor," Eric said. "We will simply show him the new curated data, the strange lights, the glitches. It will be enough to keep the funding, but not enough to trigger a national security alert." And on the inside, Travis asked, intrigued. "On the inside," Eric continued, "we answer the signal, not by drilling, but by using its own language. We will build a new low-energy transmitter, and we will send back a message, the schematic of a DNA molecule, a map of our solar system, the sound of a human heartbeat." It was a brilliant synthesis of their opposing views, a way to protect the entity while still engaging with it, a strategy of misdirection and secret dialogue. It would require them to become actors, to live a double life, to be both scientists and spies. They looked at each other. The anger and division in the room began to dissipate, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. They had been custodians. They had been students. Now they had to become guardians. Their new mission began that night. Under the silent watch of the Utah stars, they sent their first whispered reply into the heart of the mesa. A simple, elegant double helix broadcast on a carrier wave of pure mathematical inquiry. They had no way of knowing if it would be understood. But for the first time since closing the borehole, it felt less like an ending and more like a new beginning. Part 7, The Ghost War. Chapter 23, The Theatrical Haunting. The long game began with a performance. Eric's strategy required them to be puppeteers of the paranormal, feeding the ever-watchful eyes of Jones's organization, a steady diet of confusing, unverifiable, and ultimately useless data. Their first act was timed to coincide with the known orbital path of a KH-12 Keyhole spy satellite, a detail Eric had procured through a discreet contact in the civilian satellite tracking community. As the satellite began its high-altitude pass over the Uinta Basin, the team initiated their play.